Prairie police say it is the worst case of child abuse they have ever seen.
Grand Prairie police later called it the worst case of child abuse we've ever seen.
I do remember picking up, sorry. I picked up the little girl and she was limp, she was cold.
The officers and medics at the scene, seasoned professionals who had seen it all, were in tears. Flash images of crime scene reports, medical examiner findings, and police interviews. Photos of Leiliana's bruised body. A shot of her bright, smiling face from before the abuse began. The contrast is haunting. How did a little girl end up suffering such horrific abuse despite multiple warnings to Child Protective Services? Leiliana Wright was born in 2012, while her mother, Jeri Quesada, was serving a prison sentence for burglary. Her early years were spent in the loving care of her paternal grandparents, who gave her the warmth and security every child deserves. She was happy, energetic, and full of life, until the system put her back into the hands of the woman who would ultimately be responsible for her death. Jeri Quesada had a long history of drug abuse, domestic violence, and criminal behavior. She had already lost custody of her other children, deemed unfit by Child Protective Services years before.
In October 2014, 2 months before the scheduled hearing, CPS already had a report that Leiliana's little half-brother was born with drugs in his system. And during that investigation, the children's mother tested positive on a drug test. Despite all of this evidence existing, Clekley's attorney did not file any supporting documents with the court to back up his client's sworn statement. Despite Elisa Clekley's affidavit raising her concerns, her attorney advised her to come to an agreement outside of Haddock's courtroom. He said, "Elisa, if you go into her courtroom," his exact words, "you are going to lose everything." These attorneys were, afraid, if you will, to go into her courtroom. Both parties agreed to give Leiliana's mother custody and guarantee the Clekley's visitation rights. As a result, the judge never heard the case, but signed off on the agreement. Clekley's attorney, Gregory Houseworth, declined to talk with us about why he advised Clekley not to go before Judge Haddock. Clekley filed a complaint with the Texas bar against Houseworth. She believes if there had been a hearing in the case, Leiliana would be alive today. Anytime harm comes to a child is frustrating and is heartbreaking. Judge Haddock was appointed by Judge William Harris. In April of last year, a month after Leiliana's death, Judge Harris told us there was no court documentation of CPS's involvement, and that is possibly one reason why critical information did not come to light. It certainly appears that there should have been a hearing on this case. It certainly appears that the court should have been given some evidence about the mother and about her
circumstances. But that didn't stop her from regaining custody of Leiliana in 2013, just after she was released from prison. Despite warnings from family members and documented reports of abuse, the courts placed Leiliana back in her mother's care, sealing the little girl's fate. Her new home was not a safe one. Jeri's drug use spiraled, and she entered a toxic relationship with Charles Phifer, a violent ex-convict with a history of child abuse allegations. Together, they turned Leiliana's life into a living nightmare. Reports of bruises, neglect, and malnutrition surfaced repeatedly, yet CPS failed to intervene. A caseworker saw bruises on Leiliana just weeks before her death but closed the case. No one removed her from the home. No one saved her. March 12, 2016. Leiliana is beaten throughout the day. She is tied up, suspended in a pantry, and force-fed liquid until she vomits. She is choked, slammed against a wall, and left in a closet. March 13, 2016. She is found unresponsive, cold, lifeless. The medics try, but they cannot save her. Jeri and Charles are arrested. Both try to shift blame onto the other, but the evidence is overwhelming. DNA places Charles at the scene of the beatings. He is sentenced to life without parole. Jeri, in a plea deal, gets 50 years in prison. CPS is scrutinized but not held accountable for its failure to act. Leiliana's paternal grandparents, the ones who loved her most, say the system failed her. She could have been saved. We did everything we could, but no one listened. Flashback to a smiling Leiliana, playing, singing, happy, then her bruised and battered body in the hospital bed. Children don't die from abuse in one day. They die little by little. Every time their cries for help are ignored. Born in 2012, while her mother, Jeri Quesada, was serving a prison sentence for burglary. From the moment she entered the world, her life was marked by instability. Yet for a brief period, she knew love and security. She was placed in the care of her paternal grandparents, who showered her with affection and provided her with a stable, happy home. She was a bright, joyful child, full of life and curiosity. She loved to play with animals, especially the chickens her grandparents raised. Her laughter was infectious, her spirit vibrant. She would sing songs with pure innocence, finding joy in the little things. Under the care of her grandparents, she had a childhood filled with warmth, one where she was safe. But safety would not last. When Jeri was released from prison in 2013, she immediately fought for custody of Leiliana. Despite her history of addiction, neglect, and criminal behavior, the courts granted her request. She took Leiliana away from the only home she'd ever known, ripping her from the loving arms of her grandparents. It was the beginning of a nightmare. A child who had once been surrounded by love was now placed in the care of a mother who had already lost her other children. A mother unfit to parent, a mother whose return was
Child Protective Services received their last report regarding Leiliana. It was about her death. Shortly after midnight, Grand Prairie police were called for a medical emergency to the home of Jeri's deceased grandmother. This was where Leiliana was left in Charles' care. When the medics arrived at the scene, they found 4-year-old Leiliana, who was no longer breathing. 75% of her face was covered in bruises. One eye was so swollen that the girl was unlikely to be able to see anything with it. There were marks from restraints on her wrists. The child's body was cold and lifeless. Jeri tried to convince the rescuers that everything happened because Leiliana slipped in the shower. Allegedly, nothing else happened. And then she asked to ride with her daughter in the ambulance to the hospital. But they refused, explaining that she and her boyfriend had to wait for the investigators and answer questions.
Red flags that should have kept her from ever regaining custody of her daughter. She had a long history of drug addiction, domestic violence, and child neglect. Her older children had already been removed from her care by Child Protective Services, deemed unsafe in her custody. Her criminal record was just as troubling. She had been arrested multiple times for DUI, possession of illegal substances, and child endangerment.
When investigators questioned Jeri Quesada, she immediately started lying. She claimed that Leiliana had fallen in the shower, a weak attempt to explain the gruesome injuries. But the detectives weren't buying it. Under intense interrogation, Jeri finally cracked. She admitted that she and Charles had been using heroin all day and that Charles had beaten Leiliana severely. She confessed to her own role in the abuse, how she had watched, how she had participated, and how she had failed to protect her own daughter. Then, she turned on Charles, exposing him as the main aggressor. With Jeri's confession and the overwhelming physical evidence, both she and Charles Phifer were arrested. There was no doubt. They were both responsible for the brutal, senseless murder of a defenseless little girl. In 2017, Jeri Quesada accepted a plea deal, admitting to her role in her daughter's torture and death. In exchange for her testimony against Charles Phifer, she was sentenced to 50 years in prison. It was a lengthy sentence, but for many, it wasn't enough. She had stood by and watched, participating in the abuse that ultimately killed her child. In 2018, Charles Phifer faced trial for capital murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA linked him to the crime, and Jeri's testimony painted a horrifying picture of his brutal treatment of Leiliana. The jury took little time to deliberate. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Against his lawyer's advice, gave an interview. To be honest, most of his statements are laughable, as they are outright nonsense.
It still gives me nightmares.
You see her face?
I see everything. Everything. I see her laying there in the floor.
Charles Phifer says he loved his girlfriend's daughter, 4-year-old Leiliana Wright, and he never hurt her, but he's accused of helping kill her. Today, Phifer spoke exclusively to News 8's Tanya Iser against the advice of a lawyer because he says we don't have the whole story.
I love Lily like she was my own. I miss her every day. Still can't quite believe that this has happened.
On the day 4-year-old Leiliana Wright died last month, court records show she was hit with a belt and a bamboo stick after drinking her 18-month-old brother's juice. She was lifted by the throat and shoved against the wall. She was bound by the wrists and thrown into a closet. The abuse lasted for hours until her little body could take no more. Leiliana's mother, Jeri Quesada, acknowledged to Grand Prairie Police she took part in the beating, but laid much of the blame on Charles Phifer, her on-again, off-again boyfriend.
I didn't do it. There's no way. Anybody that knows me knows there's no way I could do this to a child.
Phifer says he came into Leiliana's life after his release from prison in September. He served time on convictions.
Lily, I couldn't play a game without her being right here.
Leiliana was born in prison and lived with her paternal grandparents until her mother's release when she was 2.
Was she afraid of her mom?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she was afraid of her. She done her best to do whatever she was told.
In the month before her death, a CPS special investigator saw Leiliana. She had bruises on her face, yet no action was taken to remove her from the home. And on that awful day when Leiliana died, Phifer says he was in a heroin-induced stupor for much of the day.
I woke up to her saying, "Lucky help me, she's not breathing." They were in the hall. She had her laying on her back. And that's whenever I really noticed how bad her face was beat up.
Did the CPS system fail Leiliana?
I believe they did, yes. Yes, I believe they did. Miserably.
He says he failed Leiliana too.
There were so many turning points that this could have went different. And I'm not one to really talk because I was one of them. I should have been able to change something. It's heartbreaking.
These are the words that Leiliana's paternal grandmother wrote in an effort to get Leiliana away from her mother. She says, "I pray the court will protect our granddaughter from what she is going through and what she is facing." The judge did not heed her words. Little Leiliana was with her mother until the day she died.
Next, Charles claimed that during the time he lived with Jeri, he saw her hit the girl twice. Allegedly, Leiliana was afraid of her mother and always did what she was told so as not to anger her. And when he said something to Jeri about it, she advised him not to stick his nose where it didn't belong. Charles also tried to portray himself as caring and compassionate. He said that he had been in touch with the Clackleys because he wanted to help them regain custody of Leiliana. But he did not tell Jeri about it. He claimed he was afraid of her reaction. In the best case, he would be left without a roof over his head. I think at most 5% of what was said is true, if not less. In July 2017, as part of a plea deal, Jeri Quesada pleaded guilty to child abuse, a felony. Under the agreement, she was to testify against Charles at his trial. Later, Jeri was sentenced to 50 years in prison. She explained that she took the deal to restore justice for her daughter. "I realize where I went wrong, but I didn't do it alone," the woman stated. In October 2018, the trial of 36-year-old Charles Phifer began. Initially, he was charged with child abuse, but then the grand jury added a charge of intentional murder. He still sees his daughter's frightened voice in his nightmares.
Why is this not even enough for you, sir?
I'm not getting my daughter back. I will never be able to walk my daughter down the aisle.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
He added that many people loved his little girl, and he expressed regret that his parents' attempt to gain custody did not succeed before her death.
Y'all are both trash. Plain and simple. Especially you. You should have gave me my daughter. You know, you took Leiliana from us. But she'll always live on, no matter what.
At the end of the trial in October 2018, the jury found Charles Phifer guilty of intentional murder. This automatically meant life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For some reason, the district attorney did not seek the death penalty for him.
It's savage. You and Jeri
did monstrous things to that little girl. Life in prison, hanging a little girl in a closet is savage. You should die in a locked closet.
However, shortly after that, the State Commission on Judicial Conduct reprimanded the judge, pointing out that his comments toward Charles Phifer were undignified and tactless.
Their granddaughter was already gone. The case sent shockwaves across the country, sparking national outrage over how CPS had failed to protect Leiliana. Reports revealed that CPS had received multiple warnings about Jeri's neglect and abuse, yet they had done nothing to remove the little girl from danger. Even when an investigator saw bruises on her face, the case was closed without intervention. Public pressure forced Texas CPS to undergo reforms and internal investigations. Policies were revised, and officials faced scrutiny for their inaction. But for Leiliana, it was too late. Her paternal grandparents, the people who had loved and cared for her, spoke out. She could have been saved. We did everything we could, but the system failed her. A final question lingers: how many more children have to suffer before the system changes? The case serves as a haunting reminder that child abuse doesn't happen in secret, it happens in plain sight. And too often, it is ignored. Encourage viewers to report child abuse and support organizations fighting against child neglect and domestic violence. Display CPS hotline numbers and child abuse prevention resources. Because for too many children, help never comes.